from Recharge Clinic in Ocala, Florida. How are you? Dr. Tieche. So we have a fun, exciting show tonight. Are we going to have a feast? Is that what's going on here?
Well, we're going to be tempted with that, but we're not going to actually eat it.
Smells good.
It does.
I think this was baked this morning.
Yeah, it does look delicious and amazing.
Yes.
Good.
So what's the problem? Why aren't we eating this delicious baguette in front of us?
Well, you know, this is a full wheat product and it looks delicious. And really, for the most part, it is delicious. But the problem is there's quite a few people in the population who suffer from gluten sensitivities as well as gluten allergies. So gluten is a protein, and there's actually 4 different proteins that cause sensitivity, and there's 4 different types of grains. Everyone just thinks it's got to do with wheat, but it really has to do with other things like barley and stuff like that. And so there's different proteins. Gluten actually means in Latin, glue.
What?
So yes, as crazy as that is. So that gives you an idea of what this protein does. It's a gooey protein, honestly, and really what it's used for in wheat and breads and things like that is to give it its texture, to let it kind of make things be sticky. So really the best way of understanding it is when you're kneading dough or pizza dough is the best way of understanding what gluten is, because that's what's doing it, that making that rubbery kind of gooey thing. So imagine that what that's doing there, it's doing to your intestines.
Well, hold on. Before we get that deep, it seems like, why do I think that gluten wasn't around 100 years ago? Or has it been more mutated now?
Yeah, well, there's several things to that. So
Okay.
You're right. So yeah, when we were younger, I would hear about people who had gluten allergies, and those were far and few between. And we was like, that person's weird. They have a gluten allergy, And so it was because there wasn't very many. Well, those people primarily had what was called celiac disease, and that was a genetic problem where they really couldn't process any of that wheat. Well, fast forward now, what's happened is there's been a lot of changes in how the wheat is grown and then how it's produced. So one of the things that's happened is with genetically altered wheat products as well as increasing production standards, the wheat has changed to have much more protein in it so that it can be grown much faster and therefore being able to feed more people, but being able to grow more cheaply. So there's more substances in it that cause more problems. Gluten is just one of them, actually. There's actually some other substances that are in wheat, processed wheat, that cause us problems. So that's one of the things that's changed it, so that there's a lot more of that. So within the wheat itself, when we ate it, there was much lower amounts back in the, say, 70s, 80s. Now there's much more. So if you were someone who maybe had a slight sensitivity to it, now you're going to really be affected by that. The other thing is how the wheat is processed. So it used to be that wheat was ground in stone mills, and it was not coarsely ground. And so what happens is it didn't break down this protein so badly that made it allergenic. And so that is that is one of the main problems that there is, because wheat now is ground it's just pulverized. It's made into like flour, but which seems to think, well, that doesn't make sense. How was it before? Well, it was flour. It was just at a molecular level, much coarser. And those molecules that were in there were less damaging to us. So add those two things together. Now more people are having problems with this substance, which is found in lots of products. It's not just only in bread. And so the problems is when people have a sensitivity to this protein, it causes an inflammatory response. And that's a big problem that we have with everything that causes our body's problems, inflammation.
Right. And
so our goal is to try and keep inflammation in our body at a minimum, because that's what triggers a lots of other reactions. And honestly, when people are eating gluten, what happens is it's affecting how things are absorbed in their intestine. It's disrupting the cellular membranes at that level because they're not functioning properly. So it's letting some of these proteins come into the blood, and keeping other ones out. And it's actually stimulating an allergic reaction, which is what allergic reactions are. These proteins are in the body and your body's fighting it. So people have this in varying degrees. I mean, people who have severe gluten allergies, when you talk to them, they're not even aware of it. You just start asking them, like I'll ask them, like, do you have any problems when you eat? And they'll say, no, I'm fine. And when you say specifically, hey, how about when you go eat pizza? How do you feel afterwards? And this is very common. The most common thing that people say who have it on a larger scale is like, I feel bloated. My stomach is so full, I feel like by the time I'm done eating, I have to unbutton my pants because my stomach is swollen. I feel kind of gross for a day or so afterwards. Well, this is really one of the main things that we see is this bloating. And then on a milder scale, people will experience fatigue. They'll just say, man, when I eat, I just feel really tired, which is one of the things that a lot of people always associated when they ate big meals, that they got fatigued afterwards, which is common just from blood flow stuff. But it's a little bit more accentuated when you have gluten. And so what is causing this inflammation and makes you tired.
And a lot of people just end up getting used to this and just thinking that this is them. This is how they are.
I'm just one of those people. I have a sensitive stomach. I have this. And that's what a lot of people say. I just have a sensitive stomach. When I eat, I always have a stomach ache. Well, that's not normal. There are some things that probably should aggravate your stomach, but not every time that you eat should you feel crappy. And you're right. People have gotten lulled into this just feeling crappy, and they do.
Yeah.
They eat this stuff and they feel bad. Next day they wake up, they feel okay, and they start again, and they don't really know why they feel bad during the day. So they take some Advil or they drink a lot of coffee to perk them up a bit. And yet it's this vicious cycle. But when you really start isolating out some of these food for some people, it is pretty dramatic. I mean, people will have skin lesions, eczema, all sorts of psoriasis, itching problems, joint pain. Lots of joint pain, hair loss, all kinds of problems.
Hold on, slow down.
Hold on.
Eczema, psoriasis, that's huge. So many people have that. And then hair loss, that's huge. But joint pain?
Yeah.
Who doesn't have joint pain?
Well, the thing is, I want to be clear that I don't want to say, and I don't want to imply that all of those are always caused by that.
Of course.
They're not. But you can have a mild form of that, which is then exacerbated or made worse by the fact that you are having a sensitivity to gluten.
Because all that inflammation now in your body is making what you had probably worse.
Yeah. Oh, much worse.
Yeah.
And so, people have foggy thoughts, all of these kinds of stuff that they don't associate with just eating. I mean, I just ate, I just had a pizza. Why would I feel so crappy? It wasn't poisoned. But in reality, you are being poisoned because you're having an allergic reaction to this, and your body is rebelling. And people have it at different degrees. I mean, people who have very bad celiac or bad gluten sensitivities or sensitivities to whatever other those proteins that are in there. I mean, you may have abdominal bloating, you may get diarrhea, want to throw up. But on a milder scale, you're just going to feel bad. You're not going to digest your foods properly. You're going to get swelling in your intestine because it's aggravated. So you just don't feel good like you ought to. And honestly, what it does is it inhibits other things. I mean, when your body's making these antibodies, it makes antibodies towards our thyroid. We see thyroid hypofunction or low thyroid. And what does that affect? Well, that affects your energy. That affects your hair. That affects your metabolism. It's very difficult then. So I think when someone is having problems, when they feel bad and they're just kind of eating a generalized diet of whatever comes their way, I think something it's worth a try. Some people do this to a little bit more of an extreme degree. It's called an elimination diet, where you start eliminating certain food products out of your diet and then go to a very, very basic diet and then try to get feeling better and then slowly add different things to see which one's causing it. You don't add more than one at a time because then it could become confusing.
And when you're doing this elimination diet and you do start to bring things back in, so let's be clear, and with the elimination diet, you're going to take out a lot, go to a very basic, not bread, but a very basic diet. And then after you're feeling good, that's when you'll add something back in, one every few days or every 5-ish days.
Yeah, I would try to wait a week. It's because a lot of these things take a little while. So, it's interesting. And you could say, well, this is hogwash or whatever, and it's not really true. It's not very common. Well, listen, we have a very, very busy weight loss clinic, and we put people on low glycemic or keto type diets. The basic premise of one thing that we have everyone do is restrict their carbohydrate intake, because we know that helps promote fat loss. But more importantly, what it ends up being is most people who have eaten whatever are going gluten-free. It is repeated time and time again when you see these people, how much better they feel in 1 to 2 weeks. It's not just one every, couple of hundred people. It is like maybe every other one. I feel amazing. I feel great. I never want to eat that stuff again. I don't feel so bloated. I have much more energy, everything. So, this is how common it is. It's very, very common. And so I think that, from whatever extreme that you notice, if you're noticing anything, if your kids are having rashes or having, difficulty concentrating or all sorts of stuff like that, I mean, even some forms of autism and all of that kind of stuff are associated with, with these problems of food sensitivities. I mean, gluten is just one of them. And so you have to be, you have to be proactive with this stuff. You can't just sit back and say, well, this is what they make, this is what we're going to eat. It's not. Those days are gone. And what's happened is, when you look at other countries who have different ways of farming wheat and products, the incidence of gluten sensitivities and these problems is very low.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So isn't in Europe it's lower?
Well, it had been, and so now there's some transition, but it had been primarily farmed much differently and processed much differently. So when I talked about the stone grinding compared to that's how they process it. So it made the incidence much lower. And so people could say, well, I can eat pasta when I go to Italy, or I can eat bread when I go there. And lots of people do eat pasta that are there and bread. And you say, well, how come they don't have it? Well, it's a whole different processing system. So their system has got two things. One, the actual amount of gluten in their wheat is lower. Secondly, it's processed a different way, so you're less sensitive to it. So yeah, it's really interesting, because what they did was they took people and they fed them this old-fashioned type of stone grinding of the wheat, which is kind of hard to find now, because it's not like wheat bread that you think is coarse. That is not true wheat bread. All they're doing when they take wheat bread is take regular flour and add some coarse flour to it. It's nothing like you think as what you wanted to believe, like, oh, I'm eating less processed stuff. No, actually, it's more processed, because they're taking the basic stuff and adding crap back to it.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it is. So the more basic the wheat is, the bread is, the more dense it's going to be. It's going to be really kind of, well, it's going to be unused to, not what we're used to as far as the light and fluffy. It's not going to be that way. So they found that when they took that kind of bread and fed it to people, even people with gluten sensitivities, they were not sensitive. So it's a twofold thing. It's how the wheat is processed and the type, the increased amount of gluten. So we can't control about how it's processed unless we process our own, or we can find some place that processes it that way, which is not easy. I mean, I've looked. You can buy that stuff. A lot of times it has to be refrigerated. It's a process. I mean, you really got to go out of your way. You might be able to find some bakeries that produce things that way, but the bread's not going to last very long, so people tend not to want to buy it, because you have to consume it fairly quickly. It doesn't have preservatives and stuff. That's why everyone likes Wonder Bread or all this other junk. You
the last 7 years,
you put it in your closet, nothing ever happens with it. You can build a house out of it.
Possibly be good.
And so there's got to be some reason why there's that. There was an interesting study that said on this same type of bread, on that same type of flour, if they gave it to rats, if they took the coarsely ground wheat and the finely ground wheat, rats would not eat the finely ground wheat. So what does that say?
Wow.
That's pretty weird. So I don't know. You have to take all of these things into consideration. I'm not saying throw everything out the window and be that way, but if you're someone that's feeling bad, or you have family members that are feeling bad, let's try and really work on this. Let's get some of these things out of your diet, particularly restricting them as much as you can, because these are real. The other thing that's in processed wheat, which is another product, which has not got anything to do with gluten, is Roundup, glyphosate. That is very prevalent in commercially produced, really all sorts of vegetables, but it's also in wheat. And so that wheat then gets fed to beef. It gets concentrated in the meat. We eat that beef if you're not eating organic stuff, and it's in there, and now you're getting that same exposure, which is another problem that causes abdominal pain, disruption of gut flora, things like that.
It's really hard to get completely away from all of this.
You
if you're aware,
so let's just be clear. You can't.
You can't.
It used to be that you can't. Well, you have to restrict it. It's like everything. We just got to do the best you can. Yes, is it going to be able? Are you able to go to zero? No. But you got to do the best. And if you're particularly symptomatic, then you really got to work harder. If you're someone that doesn't, and none of this bothers you, well, you're lucky. I guess you can get by with it. But almost everyone I talk to doesn't feel good after they eat, or they struggle with bloating and all this kind of stuff. You got to think, what's going on in my body if this is happening?
But the thing is what a lot of people really don't connect the dots, because they're busy. You're busy and you're eating, and you think acne, sensitive skin, rashes, the stomach aches, the headaches, inability to concentrate, stomach aches, and they really don't put it together. So if you have any of those symptoms, it's time to, this might be the cause. It may or may not be, but this is an easy way, instead of going to the doctor and being put on prescription to take care of that skin or take your headaches away or, do something for your stomach. I mean, this could be an easy way of fixing the problem, because this is what's causing the problem, is eliminating gluten. And really, we really limit the gluten in our house because we've experienced this ourselves. We have a 12-year-old that has had skin, basically eczema, since she started eating, and didn't put it together until, maybe 2 years ago. Guess what? No skin problems, taken away immediately as soon as we took the gluten
And the way
out.
that we know that's true is we let her binge and have some carbs.
We thought, it'll be okay. We're going on vacation. She can eat a little bit of gluten. What's it going to do? Oh my gosh, she will not eat it now. She will not eat it. She won't touch it. She's 12 and she says, nope. She knows what it does to her body. Then we have a 15-year-old that has found, because we are gluten-free, we try to be a lot gluten-free in our house. Our 15-year-old realized every time she goes to eat gluten, she starts breaking out on her face. That's another thing. And so it could be simple. It could be really simple. And just for the record, today, there's so many gluten-free things that taste great. The only thing that we've found in our house that doesn't taste amazing that's gluten-free is bread. That's the one thing that there's plenty of gluten-free bread. It's not terrible, but if you love this good old-fashioned baguette that we have sitting here, you're going to struggle a little bit finding that same flavor. But cookies and
there's keto bread, which tastes pretty good too. I mean, it's not the same consistency, and that's the problem. But you know what? If you feel miserable every time you eat that, and you go off of it for a while, you're not gonna miss it.
Yeah, you won't. You'll say, you know what? After you've gone off of it and you go back on and feel that way again, you won't go back on. You will remember that, and you won't. But it is going to take you getting off of it, getting back on, to know that you don't want to play with that anymore.
It's just so common, and what's sad is we all, as a nation, myself included, for many years, we just got so used to not feeling great.
Yes.
That you attribute it to work or this, or maybe you ate something bad, and it's just sort of like, well, this is how we feel. But when you don't eat that way, and you try to do a little better job with your diet, and your stomach isn't hurting you every day, or I hear people saying, I got stomach aches every day. Well, okay, let's try and figure that out. Unless you're eating poison, what's going on? Well, in fact, you'll a little bit. The other problem that people do have, which is very highly related to this, is dairy intolerance. And it's much more than lactose intolerance, which everyone thinks it is. It's always just lactose. It's not. There are some proteins. So there is one. That is a big problem. The sugars in milk and ice cream and stuff can cause some people to have problems, particularly if they've already had their gut has been sensitized to, whether it be glutens or something else. So their gut flora can't really handle that, because what happens is it ferments. Basically, the bacteria are now able to break down that sugar, which is lactose, and it ferments and becomes gassy and causes all that problem, which is, people know. But there's also some proteins in milk and ice cream and stuff, dairy, that some people are very sensitive to. And it's a much smaller number, but it's out there. So if people say, I've tried lactose, Lactaid, or, the lactose removed milk, and they still feel that way, well, they may be sensitive to that protein. And so that's
it's not a lactose intolerance.
No, it's a protein. So that's a problem for them. Now, what does seem to be interesting is that even though people who have maybe gluten and wheat problems and that sensitivity of whatever that substance is that's in there that's aggravating you, that there's that high correlation with dairy, it doesn't seem to be as prevalent in people who eat fermented dairy. So in other words, cheese, yogurt, kefir, which is another fermented dairy thing, yes, does not cause that. Yogurt, all of those things are good. But milk and ice cream, those are the ones that are really just straight out of the cow, and they cause a problem for people.
Interesting.
And that's one that I hear too. People say, yeah, I love milk, but boy, it just makes me sick after I drink it. But people are drawn to it, myself included. I know. I am very sensitive to it. Every time I drink it, I get a bad runny nose and a sore throat. And I never put two and two together for years, because I was like, well, it's just my allergies. It's just my allergies acting up. But for me, it is not. It's just very much that way.
So what are some other symptoms? So you said runny nose.
I get a bad sore throat.
A sore throat.
I mean, like I have a bad sinus infection.
Wow, from dairy. What other symptoms would people?
Well, a lot of people have abdominal pain. reflux, bloating, diarrhea, all that kind of stuff, because it just depends what sort of little war is going on in your body. If it's causing that, something's going on.
Right.
I mean, something is going on. So everyone's going to have a different amount, depending on maybe the mixture of toxins that you've had in your stomach. You could have had this thing that your body doesn't agree with. You ate this, Hey, you ate some ice cream after you ate some bread. Well, man, you're going to have a big old mess going on in there.
Mm-hmm.
And so people just attribute it to, that's just what it is. That's how I am. I'm sensitive to everything. Well, it's not that fun. It's not that fun.
Do people become more sensitive to these things as they age, or can it just come on suddenly that they maybe didn't have this sensitivity before and now they do?
I don't know that they get more sensitive to it as they age. I think part of it has been, as people have gotten older, I think they may be more aware of it now because one of our exposure is higher now. My age and younger, remember when there wasn't that much exposure and they didn't have problems to it. Now you're getting sensitized, just like you're getting sensitized to any other allergen. So you get sensitized one, you get sensitized to another, and then you start having this process over and over again. And there's so many other things that are in there. I mean, like I said about the Roundup, that doesn't directly affect us as much as it messes up our gut flora. Well, people are always talking about probiotics, gut flora, and really every aspect of functional medicine goes down to our gut, because really that's where all of our food is processed. We break down the food into the micronutrients that are absorbed. If that's not done properly, if you have bad bacteria that are out processing the good, you're going to have fermentation that's going on, and that's really what's happening is fermentation and bloodstream leakage of these proteins. So the fermentations, that's definitely going to cause bellyache. It's going to cause increased transit time. It's going to cause stomach ache, diarrhea, all these things. And then when those things happen, the bacteria then is washed out. The good bacteria, the bad bacteria tends to reproduce quicker. So then you have even more problems. And it just becomes on and on and on. So until you stop that and say, okay, we're going to kind of reset everything, you're stuck with it. And it's not good.
So someone asked me one time, is there a pill that you can take to not have these symptoms and reactions to all this? I just said, well, why add another pill? Why not just not have these?
Do you mean like a medication to prevent the gluten sensitivity?
Right, yes.
No.
So there is something available, and why would you want something really?
Yeah, I don't think there is. There's not really one for dairy as well. I mean, that unless it's just purely lactose, you could take the lactate or drink the milk without that. But the problem is, it's not just that.
But why would you want a pill that will help you get rid of the symptoms from you eating poison? Just probably shouldn't be eating that.
True. I guess the idea would be is if it's just some deficiency that you can't digest it, maybe you're taking a digestive enzyme to help it. But that's not the case. It's not that simple. And so it really ends up being avoidance. And so when you see people on these really sort of restrictive diets, we all kind of mock them like, well, they don't eat this and that. But watch, they're probably feeling pretty darn good. They probably have really good energy levels. They're not running to the bathroom every 15 minutes. And so, they feel better. Their skin's better. They just look better. And they're probably sleeping better. So, who's outsmarting who?
Right.
I mean, the thing that I tell people, and it's really this simple, we have a lot of people have horses here and dogs, two big industries in Ocala. None of those people, not one, lets their horses or dogs just eat whatever they want. If their dog started losing their hair because they were feeding them something, darn well their dog would not be exposed to that again. The horse started having a problem with stomach aches and decreased performance because they were just letting them eat too much. They would take them right off of that. So we do these things. We have a good understanding of it. All these people have a good understanding of it. We understand it. We just don't want to apply it to ourselves for whatever reason. I don't know what that reason is.
We need to have self-control. That's why. It's hard putting down the food. You have to have self-control. But if it's a life-changing experience and you feel better, why not?
Well, it used to be, availability of that stuff. Going gluten-free or gluten-restricted, or however you wanted it, was difficult. Those products weren't available. So you really had to really research to, buy snacks and cookies.
But, we shouldn't be eating that crap.
We shouldn't either. But people do want to have that. So the reality is, let's see, it was difficult. So people didn't do it. They just ate it. Now, every store you go to has got
everything gluten-free.
Crackers, cookies, chips, tortillas,
everything is
tacos,
gluten-free.
everything is gluten-free.
But, really, if you're eating not processed foods, you're really not going to have very much gluten in them.
Correct.
But if you want a snack type food, that's where the gluten is. And that's where now it's very available. There's a lot of gluten-free things. But someone who may be having these things, like how fast are they going to notice feeling better if they stop eating gluten? Like if I stopped eating it this morning, how quick am I going to start feeling better?
I think you're going to feel better pretty quickly, probably in a couple of days, because you got to get rid of that initial exposure. And I think it's going to depend on how bad your reactions are, plus the type of thing that you eat. Because someone could eat a cracker that has gluten in it and not be as bad as eating a nice doughy calzone, which is probably going to send you right in. That seems to be the most common trigger thing for people, because it has so much of that gooey and the way it's processed and stuff. And so it's unfortunate because, you know, it's a very prevalent food. It tastes good and all of that, but you just got to go to, you know, keto pizza or, you know, gluten-free pizza, which can be made out of different price types.
Now, I know you had mentioned this, but I want to talk about this a little bit more before we finish, is people who have thyroid malfunctions or imbalances or whatever have major problems with gluten, don't they?
So there's a very high correlation of people who have gluten sensitivities who have antibodies towards your thyroid. That's called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And there's an enzyme that we look at, thyroid peroxidase antibodies. I'm sure not an enzyme, an antibody. And that's one of the basic tests that we do on people when they first come in trying to get a workup of their level. And you can see, I mean, some of these people, it is dramatically elevated when they are eating that, and it comes down. It's kind of like a little monitor you can see. So what that thing is also, even though it's kind of high correlation for gluten, it's just an inflammatory marker. So one of the things that we want to keep down in our body is inflammation. There's other things that we check for inflammation, like C-reactive protein, homocysteine. All of these things are inflammation markers in our body. So inflammation, what's the big thing with that? Well, inflammation is a disease-causing problem. It breaks down DNA.
So having inflammation causes disease.
It breaks down the way all of the products in our body work. It causes plaque to be formed in our arteries. It causes plaque to be formed in our heart. So these are the bad things. It's the inflammation. So basically, we're triggering a bad response by this stuff, causing all these responses in our bodies. Unfortunately, you know, you'll see elevated cholesterol, all those kind of stuff. They put you on another medicine to stop that. But if you start removing some of these things, your body's just going to naturally start producing that. And it's going to calm itself down. So it's a simple thing. It's simple in, you know, in understanding, but it's difficult to implement when you have been raised one way and you want to switch back.
I think it's initially like, whoa, people are like, I can't take gluten out. But we've been doing it for a while now, and it's really not that hard. It's just accepting it and saying, I'm going to do it. That's probably the hardest part. But then once you start, it is not hard. It really isn't hard. I
mean, if people like pasta, there's gluten-free
pasta. Oh my gosh, you cannot tell the difference.
No.
You can't tell the difference.
And then, I mean, brownies, all of that kind of stuff. The main thing, like you said, is bread. You know, if you like garlic bread or sandwiches, it's a little bit different. And so that's just what it is, you know, a little bit different. If they said, this is how the world is, this is all you can have, you'd eat it.
Right.
And that would be your new norm.
Yeah.
You know, we just don't accept that. We just say, well, I'm going to have what I want. Okay.
Well,
and you're going to pay the price.
Yeah, you're going to feel bad.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to come to a close. Is there anything else that you wanted to add today?
Well, I think you know, that people should always be on the alert for something that might be, when they're not feeling good, really try to track it down, look back at what you may have been exposed to, you know, whether it be something you drank, ate, something you inhaled, you know, if you were around some exposure, you know, whether it be molds or other toxins that were in our environment. We have to be much more aware of that. We have to really kind of pay attention, because we just get caught up in just not, you know, being busy and busy and busy. And before you know it, all of a sudden you go, and you're done. And that's the thing. And so you just have to be aware of it.
Well, thank you for joining us on food sensitivities and allergies. We will see you next week. Feel free to comment below if you are watching this later than when it's live. Check out our website. Contact us if you'd like a free consultation at Recharge Clinic. And I guess that is it for tonight. We will see you next week.